To say that I'm not the type to scare easily would be more than a little of an understatement. It would be closer to say that not being scared by things that scare others is one of my defining characteristics in the eyes of my friends and family. One of the things that stands out about me. I saw The Shining when I was only 6 years old, The Thing when I was 7, and The Blair Witch Project when I was 9, the day it came out in theaters. Although my memories of some of the earlier movies are a bit hazy in my mind, having faded from within my consciousness over the years, I remember seeing many of the movies that are proudly declared scariest of all time, and not being even remotely frightened, even as a small child. I just watched with a neutral expression, even smiling at some parts, but never crying out with the sheer terror that I heard in the voices of those with whom I was watching with. The same goes for horror games and books and scary stories and even real actual danger, as I discovered one time when I nearly died during a rock climbing accident. The rope holding me up as I scaled a sheer rock wall suddenly snapped, and cool as a cucumber, I reached out and grabbed hold of the wall, clinging to it while I waited for my friends to help rescue me. Although I knew that one mistake would send me plunging to my rocky death on the boulders below, I felt no particular fear. I even used to play Russian roulette from time to time. Something about the thrill of pulling that trigger awakened a thrill inside me. But that's just how I used to be. Now I'm a nervous wreck, living out of my car, knowing every day might well be my last alive in this world. Every time I close my eyes and try to sleep, I feel a knot forming deep in the very pit of my stomach. I don't know what to do. I just want to be my old self, but I'm afraid that that version of me is dead. It all started when I was getting dinner ready for a romantic dinner with my girlfriend Allison, who was coming home after a business trip. I had everything just about ready, with candles lit and ready, and the pasta cooking in a pot of boiling water. The thought of the supernatural was the furthest thing from my mind at that point in time. My thoughts only on the preparation of food for my beloved girlfriend, Allison. A plate was in my hand as I carried it over to the counter in front of the window to the backyard so I could put the slices of sausage I had cut up into it so I could cook them in the pan on the other side of the kitchen. That's when I saw him, standing in the yard. A little boy, standing with his back to me, just a short distance from where the trees of the forest in my backyard stood tall. I wondered what the boy was doing there, considering that this was my own private property, but I didn't think it would be worth my time to shoo him away. However, just as I was about to turn back and go back to the stove so I could put the sausage slices into the pan, the boy turned around and smiled, and I could feel a terrible chill sweep into my whole body. A deep knot formed deep in the very pit of my stomach. That smile was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen in my entire life. That smile was so terrifying, it becomes almost hard to fully explain what was so terrifying about it, except that it was undoubtedly so terrifying that it just about froze my blood inside of my veins. His eyes were so cruel somehow, and his teeth, although sized like those of an ordinary child, caught the late afternoon light in a way that reminded me of the razor-sharp fangs of a saber-toothed tiger. I knew, based on a primeval instinct somewhere deep down in my DNA, that I was staring into the face of something that wasn't human. That wasn't the smile of an ordinary child who just happened to have wandered into my yard. It was the hungry grin of a predator who knew that its prey was trapped and helpless. For the first time in my entire life, I screamed with terror. I stumbled backwards and fell over, landing on the floor. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I pissed myself and shat my pants from the pure, unadulterated fear pulsing through my veins. My hands wouldn't stop shaking from the unbelievable terror of what I'd just seen. In that moment, I was so certain that I was about to die that my only thought was to crawl over to my phone, which I'd left on the glass kitchen table, and call my girlfriend, Allison, and tell her not to come over. My fate may have been sealed, but that didn't mean that Allison, the girl I loved, had to die as well. I reached the table and pulled my way up the leg of the table, my own excrement and urine flowing down the legs of my pants, but I hardly noticed because I was so frightened. When I was finally on my feet, I snatched desperately at my phone and picked it up with my hands. My hands were so slippery with cold sweat that I could barely hold the phone in my trembling hands. I was just starting to search my contacts list for my girlfriend Allison's number when I risked a glance out the window next to the kitchen table. What I saw there haunts me now, poisoning every waking moment that I live, turning my life into a living hell, like a waking nightmare that I can't escape. That child, that is to say, that thing that looked like a child, was still there, but he'd drawn closer. I'd never seen him move, but he'd been standing on the very edge of my property before, but now he was standing another 3 feet closer to my house. His inhuman, monstrous grin, the same as before, as though taunting me with the inevitability of my own approaching demise. At the sight of this terrible vision, I screamed and shat my pants again. I lost almost complete control of my body, my arms flailing so that my phone shattered against the wall. I collapsed into the kitchen table, shattering it too, and rolling through the broken glass. Adrenaline pumping through my veins, I hurried back onto my feet and started running blindly in a random direction, puking all over my shirt. I couldn't bring myself to hope that escape from my inevitable death was even possible, but fear drove my body to run out of pure instinct and fear of death. Unfortunately, the random direction I chose to run brought me barreling right into the door to the dining room. I crashed into it, breaking it off its hinges and falling into the dining room table, which tipped over, spilling the candles I'd set out for a romantic dinner and lighting the gasoline canisters I kept in the corner on fire. As far as I even had the mental energy to care despite all the fear, I was actually thankful to see them set alight, because I knew that death would be the only way to release from the all-consuming nightmare that the child had transformed my life into. I now wish, more than ever, that the fire really had killed me, but I wasn't so lucky as it turned out. The gasoline canisters exploded, throwing me backwards, propelling me into the living room, where I crashed into a big screen TV on the wall, knocking it off the wall so it landed on top of me. The pain was immense, but the fear was stronger, and drove me to crawl out from under it. Lit by the light of the fire growing out of control in the dining room next door, I crawled through the mess of my own blood and waste, screaming until my vocal cord snapped from the strain and I became incapable of making a noise from my mouth. Just then, my doorbell rang. As I could no longer scream, and my bowels and bladder were all but empty, all I could do to embody my ever-growing terror was tear out my hair in huge clumps. This was it. I was sure it was the child standing at my door with that awful smile of his, and there was no way I could escape him. Just then, I found a little piece of courage amidst all the terror. Even if it was pointless, I had to fight back. I had to at least try to survive, so when I died, I'd know I'd done my best. So, I grabbed the revolver I keep on my coffee table in the living room for games of Russian roulette, loaded 5 more rounds into it, and ran off toward the front door, prepared to face the nightmare face to face. The doorbell rang again as I approached the front door, sinisterly reminding me of the monster just on the other side of it, and I almost fainted at the dreadful sound. My knees gave out again from all the stress, and I had to crawl again, leaving a trail of blood behind me. When I reached the door, I dragged myself to my feet with the knob, and then threw it open. To my horror, there was indeed a humanoid figure on the front steps. Knowing that my death was inevitable, I aimed my gun at the humanoid figure's head and pulled the trigger. The gun rang out loud as my shot struck its target, and the humanoid figure fell backwards. For a moment, I was stupid enough to think that I'd won, that I'd killed the damn thing. I was so wrong. Stepping out onto the front steps to make sure the child was really dead, I took a long look at the humanoid body I had shot. The breath was just about sucked out of my lungs. It wasn't the child at all. No, it was my girlfriend, Allison, lying there with a hole in her head. Sobbing with silent tears, I fell to my knees and cradled her in my shaking arms. No, this wasn't right. This couldn't be happening. I hadn't meant to shoot her. Allison, the girl I loved so much. I know now that it wasn't my fault, that I was manipulated by that fear-inducing monster into doing that terrible thing. But at the time, I couldn't help but blame myself. How could I have allowed myself to shoot Allison, the woman I loved so much? Knowing that everything that I had ever loved or valued in my life had been destroyed by the terrible child, I clutched my girlfriend, Allison, tight and waited for the creature to come claim my life. Tears flowed down my cheeks and dripped onto my vomit-stained shirt as I waited for my inevitable death. The minutes passed like hours, but somehow the child didn't come to claim me. What was taking it so long? Did it want to torment me a little longer, breaking my mind with the pure terror it could evoke with its awful smile? My stomach full of dread, and a deep knot forming deep in my guts, I staggered over to the kitchen again and looked out the window. To my bewilderment, the child was nowhere to be seen. Had it left? But why? Why hadn't it come to kill me? Standing there, shivering, I realized something terrible. The creature had been coming to kill me. This I knew for sure. But then I had accidentally killed my girlfriend, Allison, and it had retreated. In other words, the monster was sated by bloodshed. I now knew what that smile it had worn really meant. It meant that it had me trapped, and I would have no choice but to kill more and more people for its twisted amusement. At first, I told myself that I wouldn't do it, that I would just sit there and wait for the child to come and kill me, but before long, the fear overtook me. I didn't want to die, and even if that meant becoming a monster myself, I wouldn't let it happen. Since that terrible day, I've been killing as many people as I can. I break into people's houses and murder them. I know that this makes me a horrible person myself, but I'm just too afraid to die. If you were put in my position, I'm sure you would do the same thing to save your own life, even if the idea seems unimaginable right now. But you're not in my position, are you? Quite the opposite, as it happens. You see, this story of mine isn't just supposed to scare or frighten you, but to warn you. I'm sorry, but I'm coming for you next. I'm right outside your house or apartment right now, getting ready to come in and kill you any second now. I'm climbing out of the car and coming up the walk now as I type this, urine dribbling down my leg. I traced your IP, which is why I know who you are, and so I posted this story somewhere I was sure that you would see it so I could apologize in advance. You probably hate me for what I'm about to do to you, but you can't understand because you've never seen that child's terrible smile. That terrible smile, the mere thought of which still causes me to evacuate my bowels with sheer terror. I haven't seen that terrible smile since that awful day. And as long as I can continue to never see it again, I'll kill any number of people if that's what it takes. I'm sorry, but it's either you or me.